arms. Song and invitation will be number 284. Number 284. Uh-oh, my phone. We shall open it back up.
I think that's actually off. Well, yay. I was about to panic again. Me and not having PowerPoint would not be fun. Good evening. So excited to be with you tonight. Excited to be able to spend some time talking about a few things. Okay. So, I'm a big toy guy. So for Christmas this year, I got, to turn this thing on, there we go. I got Rubik's Cube for Christmas. We're not working again. I can hit that button. Maybe I can't hit that button. We'll go that way. We may have to walk back over here and do some stuff. Anyway, good evening. I got a Rubik's Cube for Christmas. Rubik's Cube is invented by Aaron Ruddick in 1972. It was a Hungarian guy. He invented it and he couldn't solve it. He made it and just was fascinated by it and fascinated by how it worked, and he couldn't figure the thing out. In the early 80s, it was licensed to a toy company. And so then it became mainstream. This is a fidget spinner for those of us that are in our almost 50. We've played with these things for hours. And I played with them for a long time when I was a kid. And I loved them. And I would move it around, and I'd get a color here and maybe a color here and here. And Angie got this for me for Christmas. And I decided I want to figure out how to solve it. Show of hands. How many people here can solve a Rubik's Cube? I knew it. I knew it. Doesn't surprise me. Doesn't surprise me. I said 2, and I said Andrew and Brace. And I know Emily told me Benjamin and Haley can solve it as well. So I knew those 2 could. I didn't know about anybody else. But it's interesting how you solve it. So now, did you know there are over 43 quintillion combinations on a Rubik's Cube? I don't even know what that number means. I was trying to figure out what that 252 number is called. I can't even figure that out. That's a big number. It's more than 6 billion times the amount of people on the earth. When you take 7 billion people on the earth and multiply it by 6 billion, you come up with over 43 quintillion. That's how many different combinations you can get in a Rubik's Cube. So now, what determines the combination that you get? So there's something that determines which one of the 43 quintillion you come up with. And that is simply your choices and your actions. When I determine, I'm going to take this yellow, blue, red one, and I'm going to put it where it goes. These are my choices and my actions. And I can put it there. I actually thought about trying to do this and solve it while I talk. I'm not that good. That is hard to do. To know where you put stuff and when you move stuff, because everything you do on this cube it's an action and a reaction, and what happens and you move it. There's a pattern to solving this thing. But it's completely your choices and your actions. That's what makes up the Rubik's Cube and how you can solve it. So, fun little tidbit. Now, we're not here to talk about the Rubik's Cube. But what I do want to talk about, I want to talk about the Rubik's U. I want you to think about this. If there's more than 43 quintillion possibilities in that cube, how many different possibilities are in your life? When you get to the end of your life, how many different outcomes could you actually come up with? I tried to find a graphic that was like a person that was made like a Rubik's Cube that you could, just think about that. If you pictured your life as a puzzle and as a cube and as something you wanted to solve. But what makes up this Rubik's U? It's a couple things that are foundational that we really don't have any control in. Nature and nurture comes up a lot in conversation. Which one influences you the most? Is it nature? Is it nurture? Are you more of how you were born, or are you more of how you were raised? Well, we know a couple things. We know genetically we have certain behaviors. Person A and person B, male A, female B, came together and both created genetic material that created you. That's nature. You had no choice. And the genetics went together in a certain way to where Aaron Ruddick was destined to have brown hair, blue eyes, be 5'10", wear a size 10 shoe, and have less than average metabolism. That's just the way I was genetically made. That's just who I am. I'm a little bit outgoing, somewhat hot-headed, and I think I'm funny. Is that genetics, or is that, that nature, is that nurture? Because here's the thing about nurture. You don't really get a say in that either. Because your mom and dad decided how they're going to raise you. Nobody set me down at, 18 months old. Said, Aaron, would you prefer timeouts or spankings? Do you want to eat vegetables, or do you want to just eat whatever you want? Do you want to go to church? Do you not want to go to church? They don't give you that choice as they raise you. Your parents raise you the way your parents want to raise you, and you don't really have any say in that. So you don't really have a say in your nature, and you don't really have a say in your nurture. But here's the good part of this. The other hundreds of millions of choices are yours. You get to decide the rest of it. You get to decide what you do with that nature and with that nurture. I could decide to take my below average metabolism and make it better. Or I could decide not to. We know which one I've chosen so far. But we get to choose hundreds of millions of choices in our lives. And every one of them changes us just a little bit. Every action, every thought, everything that we do changes our life, changes our cube to a new combination. And sometimes it's not drastic, sometimes it's minor. But sometimes a lot of minor changes become drastic. Sometimes a lot of good changes become good. But it's all amount of a little bit of changes all the time. And it changes us a little bit. Think about that. When you go throughout your life, when you're driving down the road and that person cuts you off in front of you, your reaction, imagine the first time you're driving down the road and somebody cuts you off for the first time, it's never happened before. What's your reaction? You might be like, oh, it startled you. When it happens again, well, then you might be like, oh, mean person, I'm not happy. Well, then it happens again, and you start then, bad-mouthing them yourself. And then before you know it, somebody cuts you off and you're yelling at them. And it's a little habit that takes you down a certain path. And so everything we do changes the Rubik's U to make you the sum of what you are. Now, let's take a look at this in action. We're going to take a look at two different Bible characters. They're going to be Old Testament characters. And we're going to look at how their choices changed their lives. Let's take a look at King Saul. Let's take a look at Joseph. So we know Saul was the first king of Israel, and we know Joseph was the youngest son of Jacob. And so we're all familiar with those stories, so we're going to talk about these for a little bit. So first let's talk about Saul. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a 10-minute story about destruction. We're going to spend about 10 minutes, give or take a few. We might be done a little bit quicker. We're trying not to go any longer than that, because we're going to look at the life of Saul in, just little brief snippets and see what happened to Saul. All right, so who was Saul? Turn over with me to 1 Samuel. We meet Saul in 1 Samuel chapter 9. So to kind of set the stage, Israel came through the judges and said, we want a king like everybody else. They said, we want a king, we want a king, we want a king. So went to Samuel, said, Samuel, we want a king. Samuel went to the Lord, and he said, fine, I'll give them a king. And so then, Saul was chosen by God to be king. And so it told Samuel that I will send him to you. So we meet Saul in 1 Samuel chapter 9. It says, there was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, the son of Abiel, the son of Zizor, the son of Becheroth, the son of Ephadai, a Benjamite, a mighty man of power. He had a choice and handsome son, whose name was Saul. And there was not a more handsome person than he among the children of Israel. For from his shoulders upward, he was taller than any of the people. So that's what we know about Saul. We know that he was the son of Benjamite and that he was tall, handsome, good-looking, and a physical specimen. And so then, he was chosen. So then he was anointed as king. So then through a series of events, and it's really kind of an intriguing story when you look through the rest of chapter 9, that this donkey gets lost, and his dad says, take this servant and go find our donkey. So they're wandering around trying to find this donkey, and they spent a long time. It was getting late. So they said, here's the city. Let's go and see if the seer can help us locate our donkey. And Saul, knowing proper etiquette, said, we don't have anything to give him. So they came up with a plan and something to give the seer, and they went in and found Samuel. So we're looking for the seer, and he says, that's me. And then Samuel, put Saul at ease, said, the donkey's been found. Don't worry about that. You're going to be king of Israel, was basically the message. Saul was not expecting that. And then so at the end of 1 Samuel 9, chapter 27, Saul was announced as king of Israel. So Saul went from just being this, handsome, tall, fit young man to now he is king of Israel in a short period of time. Well, then after that, it's kind of where the, truck goes off the road, and then begins a series of poor choices. And you can look throughout the rest of Saul's life, poor choice after poor choice after poor choice. So we're going to look at a few of them. Turn over with me to 1 Samuel 13. So this is in the second year of Saul's reign. He reigned for the first year, and then in the second year, they had this battle they were going to go up, and Saul was given orders to wait, and then they would provide an offering, and then they would go fight. That was the instructions that he was given. Well, that's not how he did it. And if we look down, after he goes and provides the offering, and they go to war, Samuel comes to him in verse 11 and says, "What have you done?" Samuel says that to Saul. He says, "What have you done? Why did you do this thing?" And Saul said, "Well, when I saw the people were scattered from me, and that you didn't come within the appointed days, that the Philistines gathered together at Michmash, and then I said, the Philistines will not come down on me at Gilgal. I have not made supplication to the Lord. Therefore, I felt compelled and offered a burnt offering." Then Samuel said to Saul, "You have done foolish." Saul was very impatient in his decision. Saul was given instructions, and he was told how this was going to go, and he decided in his own mind, I'm going to do it my way. I'm not going to wait and do it the way that I was instructed. And he got impatient. And he jumped the gun, and then Samuel came, rebuked him, said, "You have acted foolishly." So we continue on. Fast forward a couple more battles, a couple more chapters, to chapter 15. So Saul was told, take an army and go completely destroy King Amalek. And so Saul went there and they fought and they won handily. They destroyed almost everything, but then they decided that we're going to take the king back, and we're going to take some plunder back, and we're going to take some spoil back. And so they grab all this stuff and they go back. And if we look down in chapter 15 at verse 10. It says, "Now the word of the Lord came to Samuel, saying, I greatly regret that I have set up Saul as king. For he has turned back from me and has not performed my commandments, and it grieves Samuel. And the Lord cried out all night. Then Samuel rose early in the morning to meet Saul. And it was told Samuel, saying, Saul went to Carmel, and indeed he set up monument for himself. He has gone on around and passed by and gone down to Gilgal. Then Samuel went to Saul and said to him, Blessed are you of the Lord, for I have performed the commandment of the Lord. Samuel says, What then is the bleating of the sheep in my ears, the lowing of the oxen that I hear? Then Saul said, I have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best sheep and the oxen to sacrifice to the Lord your God. The rest they have utterly destroyed. Then Samuel said to Saul, Be quiet, and I will tell you what the Lord has said to me. So you can see a couple things in there. There's a couple little things in there that kind of let us know where Saul's mind's at. He justifies it. Well, I did this so we could sacrifice it to the Lord your God. And that little word in there is very important. It was Samuel's God. It wasn't Saul's God. It wasn't Saul had an allegiance, was doing this. Saul was appointed as this king and never really took hold to serving God. But it was, Samuel, it's your God. So then it goes down. And Samuel tells Saul that the kingdom will be taken away from you. Now you are rejected as king. So the kingdom then gets turned over to Daniel. So we see in 1 Samuel 18 that Saul's hatred for Daniel begins. For Daniel was anointed as king, and Saul despised him. We see that, and then we see throughout the next chapters, Saul chasing Daniel, hunting him down. Not Daniel, David. I knew when I kept saying that, I was like, that's not the right word. But Saul hated David. And he chased him down, he hunted him down. And David had opportunity after opportunity to take him out, but he didn't. And he tried to make this better, but Saul kept his anger going. And it fueled him so much that he became consumed by that. And then we see in 1 Samuel 31, the tragic end of Saul. I told you this was going to be a synopsis, because you could spend a long time in the story of Saul. Let's look at verses 1 through 4. So now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell slain on the Mount Gilboa. Then the Philistines followed hard after Saul and his sons, and the Philistines killed Jonathan, Abinadab, Malchishua, Saul's sons. And the battle became fierce. The battle became fierce against Saul. The archers hit him, and he was severely wounded by the archers. Saul said to his armor-bearer, Draw your sword and thrust it through me, lest these uncircumcised men come and thrust through me and abuse me. And his armor-bearer would not, for he is greatly afraid. Therefore Saul took a sword and fell on it. And when his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he fell on his sword and died with him. So Saul, his 3 sons, his armor-bearer, and all of his men died together that same day. So the story of Saul ends with him taking his own life in battle. He was severely wounded and ended his own life. Throughout a history of bad decisions, demise, self-promoting, he did nothing that served God. And look at what he got from that. He was set up in a position that he could have done such great things, but he destroyed his own life. All throughout the little changes and the decisions that he made. So that's the story of Saul. Let's talk about Joseph. So we're going to talk about a 10-minute story of triumph. So, we're all fairly familiar with Joseph, so let's talk about who was Joseph. Who was Joseph? Turn over with me to Genesis chapter 37. Now, Joseph was the son of Jacob and Leah. Rachel. One of the two. Jacob and Rachel. And chapter 30 of Genesis. So then, 17 years later, this is when we meet Joseph again in Genesis chapter 37. It says, now Jacob dwelled in the land where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. This is the story of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers, and the lad was with the sons Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report to his father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all of his other children, because he was the son of his old age. Also made him a tunic of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all of these other brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. All right, so we meet Joseph, 17 years old. He was the youngest son of all the brothers, and he was the favorite of his father, and his brothers hated him. So that's what we know about Joseph starting out. So then what does this turn into? A little bit later in the story, and for a second time, we won't read this. A little bit later in Genesis chapter 37, his brothers find him out in the field, and then they wanted to kill him. They're like, let's kill our youngest brother. And I believe it was Reuben, said, no, let's not kill him. Then they came up with this idea to sell him to these Midianites that were going to Egypt. So they took Joseph and they sold him and they sent him to Egypt as a slave. So here Joseph winds up, the youngest, the favorite of his dad, hated by his brothers, and sold, heading off to a land that he knows nothing about. Not really a good scenario, not really a good start for a 17-year-old young man. So then we look, different than Saul, we see the good choices that he starts to make. His good choices in his life begin. We look over in Genesis chapter 39, a couple chapters, starting in verse 1. It says, now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. Then the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master, and his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in the sight and served him. Then he made him overseer of his house, and all that he had he put under his authority. So it was that from the time that he had made him an overseer of the house, and all that he had, the Lord had blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake, and the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in his house and in his field. So Joseph had gained favor and was put in charge of everything in Potiphar's house. It's a big step for somebody that was sold into slavery. And it was all done through good decisions and serving God. So then we see in Genesis chapter 39, a little bit farther down, that Joseph stood for morality. So, again, paraphrasing this story, Joseph's in the house, and Potiphar's wife wanted to make advances on him. Joseph said, I will not sin against my God and my master. Took off running. She kept his coat, accused him of attacking her, and Joseph was thrown in prison. Not really another good opportunity for a young man that was doing what was right. So Joseph went to being, the young man, favorite of his dad's, hated by his brothers, thrown into a pit, sold as a slave, rises back in favor with Potiphar. Potiphar's wife betrays him. He winds up finding himself thrown back in prison. really would be an easy time for him to give up and start down a road of bad decisions. But again, that's not what happens with Joseph. Joseph remains faithful. And we see in Genesis 39 and 40 that he interprets some dreams, gains favor, winds up back in position of authority. All through a series of good decisions, good choices, making the right things out of the events that are happening to him. So, fast forward even farther. Genesis 42 through 44. Joseph has risen in power. There's a famine in Canaan. So his brothers come to get food because there's food down in Egypt because they did things well and they were very successful, very profitable. And their brothers are standing before Joseph. Joseph recognizes them. They don't recognize him. And so then Joseph sets out, a path for him to bring the youngest son and bring their father. Then he reveals himself to his brothers and tells them, you meant this evil for me, but I will not repay it with evil to you. So Joseph made great decisions. Joseph's life is a life of good choices. And we sit there and we look at the more than 43 quintillion outcomes of Joseph's life. He wound up with a really good one, all because his choices and his actions. Turn with me to Genesis chapter 50. And we look at the end of Joseph's life. We see a completely different end than we do with Saul. Starting in verse 22. So Joseph dwelt in Egypt, he and his father's household, and Joseph lived 110 years. Joseph saw Ephraim's children to the third generation. The children of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were also brought up on Joseph's knees. And Joseph said to his brethren, I am dying, but God will surely visit you and bring you out of this land to the land which he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph took an oath from the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you and shall carry up my bones from here. So Joseph died, being 110 years old, and they embalmed him and put him in a coffin in Egypt. So we see a completely different ending to the life of Joseph than we do the life of Saul. In Saul, we see destruction by poor choices. In Joseph, we see ascension and blessings by good choices. And those are the two extreme contrasts that we find in these two individuals. Now, there's a variety of mixtures in between there. We could pick Bible characters and go throughout their life, and we could see some that did really good and failed and did really good, and some that were roller coasters. I mean, it's amazing the plethora of different opportunities we see in Bible characters. There's tons of them. So those are two that we want to look at. So now, back to us. Talk about the story of our life. Not the One Direction song. Not the One Direction song at all. I don't know how many people that, because as soon as I said that, when I put this together, I'm like, no, not the One Direction song. But that is us, the beginning of our life. We are a seed placed in a womb, and we have very little control. And we talked earlier, the first thing that we're given is our nature. That's the one thing that our parents gave us at the beginning, whether we wanted it or not. They put our DNA came together, and that's what we have. Then, we're given our nurture. So it's a different color block on our cube. So our nurture creates a little bit of who we are. Then we move on, and we get our family. These are the three things we really don't get a choice on. We talked about how we don't get to choose nature. We don't really get to choose nurture, and you can't pick your family. There's no catalog before you're born. There's not a bunch of babies sitting up there looking at catalogs going, that Walker family looks pretty good. I'll go hang out with them. And so then, Andrew clicks the button. winds up being the product of Greg and Allison. It's not how it works. We're given our families. We're born into them. Now, we get to choose how much we stay. We don't have to stay. We can do whatever we want with that. But these are the three things we can't change. We can't change them at all. They're the three that are given to us. Now, the other three sides of your cube, your moral choices and your decisions. What are you going to stand for? The country song, if you don't stand for anything, you've got to stand for something or you'll fall for anything. So what are your moral stances in life? What are your moral decisions? That's really going to affect the way your life turns out. Because if you have high moral standards, you're going to get one thing. Low moral standards, you get another. And what do we do with those? The decisions we make are really going to change how this turns out. And then we have friends. They get an entire side of your block. Because your friends are very important in your life. Believe it or not. Now, the cool thing about some of these things is you can take one block out and replace it with a different block. Now, that's a choice you get, because some of these things you get to choose. You get to choose your friends. The Bible has lots of warnings and lots of examples about bad friends. It has lots of examples and lots of promises about good friends. Proverbs talks a lot about how, a good friend is someone to be cherished. And so our friends are an important side of our block. So that gives us what? 2, 4, 5 sides? 2, 4, that's 5 sides of our block. Then our last one is our career. That's an important part of your block because you spend a lot of time at work. You spend a lot of time at your job. It provides you a living. It provides you the money that we need to survive and really have the life that we want. But what career implications are you going to have? Did you pick a career that's going to be good for your spiritual life, good for your family life? Pick one that's going to be bad for it? Pick one that puts you in a bad environment, a good environment? Did you pick one just arbitrarily, just wander into a job and say, well, I'm kind of stuck here? But that is an important thing. And again, careers are something we get to choose. So there's 3 we don't get to choose and 3 that we do. So that puts us down here with our life. Now remember, the 6 things that control your life. There's 6 things that are on your cube. And there's 43 quintillion choices and outcomes on that cube. How many are there in your life? And everything that we do messes it up. Now, the one thing I can promise you, doesn't matter which one of the 43 quintillion setups you give me, I can solve this in 5 minutes. Because there's a pattern. And it's not hard. It's memorization. You do one thing, then you do another thing, then you do another thing, and it just, you walk right down the path. I was messing with it, and Caitlin was sitting there watching me. And she's like, it's amazing. It's not really amazing, it's just a pattern. It fits. It works. Because it's very predictable when you follow the pattern. So is our life. Believe it or not, Jesus provides us a pattern. Jesus provides the pattern for a life. Because if you want to solve your cube, to get to the end of your life, and stand before a holy God that says, welcome home, there's a pattern. And it's not that hard. Now, is it easy? No. Is there struggles? Absolutely. But Jesus has promised us, if we're faithful, He'll be faithful to us. It's a few things Jesus tells us. John chapter 14, verse 6. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the light. No one comes to the Father except through me. So we know that our path to God, our path to our eternal home, our path to solving this puzzle of life is through Jesus. And He lays it out for us. And He's always looking for us. In Matthew chapter 28 says, Ye who are weary and heavy laden, come unto me. I will give you rest. For I am meek and lowly, and I am Lost that verse. But he does say, come unto me and I'll give you rest. You will find rest for your soul, is the gist of it. Because Jesus tells you, I have the way, and I will give you rest. I will give you the path. I will give you the pattern. All you have to do is come to me. Brings us to our reading this evening. Paul writes to the Romans, I am convinced that nothing can separate us from God. That's what he tells them. I am convinced that neither life nor death nor principalities nor things present nor things to come can separate us from the love of God. The only thing that can take us away from that is us, by our decisions and our choices. And he says at the end, we can conquer anything in this life through the power of Jesus. That's where our hope lies. Two of my favorite verses in the Bible. Philippians chapter 4, verses 8 and 9. It's the filter that gives us everything to run our life through. Let's read that real quick. Well, we'll read it at natural speed. Philippians chapter 4, starting at verse 8. It says, finally, brethren, Paul writes to the people in Philippi, finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there's any virtue, if there's anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. These things which you have learned and received and heard and saw in me, these do, and the God of peace will be with you. If we have righteous living, and we follow the pattern that Jesus has for us, we can stand with confidence. We can walk with confidence through this world and through this life, knowing at the end, there's a glorious home waiting on us. It's 43 quintillion ways to do it wrong. There's only one way to do that right. And ultimately, there's only one way to get to heaven. And that's through Jesus. And all we have to do is trust and obey. We sing that song. For there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. Our life is a puzzle. The nice thing is we're in control. We get to make the decision and the choices. We get to choose which path we go down. We get to choose what piece we're going to put where. And if we turn to Jesus and we look for the pattern that He has given us, we can find a great home. If we can help you in any way, if you're subject, that we have water that's ready, we'll pray with you, we'll reach out, we will help you. If we can do that in any way,